it's my job in any situation to dial into how do you see the world? What are you after? Have you been wronged? What's at stake? And then what's happened to you recently?
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. Today's episode is going to be an awesome and fascinating conversation. I can't wait to get into it. On today's episode, we have got on former FBI hostage and crisis negotiator and author of the brilliant book, Never Split the Difference. And this is Chris Voss. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here. Very happy to be here with you.
Awesome, Chris. I'm really, really excited about this conversation. I've done a brief intro there, but for my listeners who may not be familiar with you, can you introduce yourself to them?
Yeah, sure. Former FBI hostage negotiator. And after I left the Bureau, I wrote a book called Never Split the Difference, negotiating hostage negotiation, emotional intelligence ideas. Do they apply to your life? You know, business and personal life. And the book has done really well. And it's led the business negotiation category basically for 6 years. But what I'm even prouder of, if I can be allowed to be proud, it sells globally. It's just not a bestseller in the U.S. It sells well in China. It's in 36 languages, I think, 33 countries, or the other way around. It's global because everybody wants to be understood. And it doesn't matter if you grew up in Pakistan or India or China or Bolivia. You want to communicate legitimately and genuinely with people, and it kind of gives that guidance.
What made you want to write a book?
I just wanted to help. And then actually writing a book in order to be able to help, like I had my consulting business started with my son, Brandon, brilliant negotiator, who's gone out on his own. He's as independent as I am. And we started teaching and training, and I figured it'd just catch on because it works. Like just show people something that works. And I was teaching in business schools, but we just couldn't get any traction. And sort of the reaction to somebody by people who needed social proof. Well, if your stuff is any good, how come you don't have a book? Our stuff is great. Well, and it works, but where's your book? So it took a little bit of time. When I first got out of the Bureau, a lot of people said, you're never going to make it as a consultant if you don't have a book. Because it's a great business card, and people are going to ask, if you're any good, where's your book? And I didn't really buy that, and I didn't want to put a book out in a hurry. We ended up assembling a team, if you will. If you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go as a team. And a critical thing that made the book work is Tall Roz, co-writer. Tall is a brilliant, brilliant writer and perfect for that kind of book. So I'd been out for a few years before we finally put the book out, and then the book has been out, and it's got traction globally, like worldwide.
Have you been surprised by the level of success it's had internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no way that it's sold so far over 4 million copies.
Incredible. Wow.
And all the languages that it's in, that when we got the re-up for China, my agent came back to me and said, this is the largest offer we've ever gotten for a re-up in China. And it's in Chinese, and it's not Americans how to deal with Chinese, it's Chinese dealing with Chinese. And I never expected it would be as successful as it is.
We all know that in today's fast-paced world, it's harder than ever to live a healthy lifestyle. Just about everyone is struggling with gut issues, stress, inflammation, fatigue, or immune health issues. Most of it comes down to diet, but getting nutrient-rich food consistently isn't always easy or affordable. With hectic schedules, processed foods, and the rising cost of healthy options, we all need a cheat code as the game of life gets a little bit more difficult. My cheat code is Optimal Human. With over 90 ingredients, including powerful vitamins and other nutrients, one serving of Optimal Human helps me fulfill my daily nutritional needs. And in my opinion, it tastes better than other green supplements on the market. Optimal Human contains powerful superfoods like organic reishi mushroom for your brain, turmeric root for your joints, beetroot for cardiovascular health, CoQ10 for cellular health, and prebiotics for gut health. It's simple to integrate into your daily life. Just add 1 scoop to water, a smoothie, or your protein shake and get an instant delicious nutrient boost. Try Optimal Human today and get 50% off your first month by going to optimalhuman.com/Zuby. One more time, that's optimalhuman.com/Zuby. Go check it out.
Tell me the story of how you got into the FBI, because that's not a typical career path.
Once upon a time, I originally just wanted to be a police officer. I was inspired by this movie I saw when I was about 16. And it was about a couple cops in New York City called the Super Cops, of all things. And they had a great time doing a lot of good, and the community loved them. You know, a couple of white dudes enforcing the law in Bed-Stuy in New York before Bed-Stuy got gentrified. And it just showed the commonality of human beings. And no matter how bad the neighborhood is, there's always more good people than bad people. And they loved these guys. And then also the one thing I didn't realize at the time, these guys were mavericks. I mean, they didn't do what their bosses told them to do. They're very independent. So I wanted to do good things. I wanted to have a good impact. And I started out as being a cop. My father was disappointed. Then I went out and got a job that only required a high school diploma after he'd paid for my college degree. So then he encouraged me to do federal law enforcement. I grew up in Iowa. I'd never been anywhere. Like going to Illinois was a big deal where I grew up. Crossing a state line was a big deal. So I'm talking to a Secret Service agent about being in federal, and he said, yeah, you know, I traveled all over the world with Secret Service. And I thought to myself, somebody paid you to travel around the world? Like, I'm in. And the Secret Service wasn't hiring, but the FBI was. I didn't know the federal alphabet. I didn't know the CIA from the FDA from the FBI. You know, I didn't know.
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them. So, you know, the Bureau hired me because they were hiring a ton of people. The Secret Service wasn't. Sent me to New York. Didn't want to go to New York. Loved New York. And I was on a SWAT team. Re-injured my knee. From college, I tore my knee up. I'm kind of a medium-sized dude, and I figured that a lot of people much bigger than me on the street. So I was studying martial arts, screwed up the knee, martial arts. Later on, I'm in SWAT and re-injuring the knee. What do you do? Well, we had hostage negotiators, and it didn't look hard. You know, those guys always went out when we went out. They kind of sat around and talked on the phone while we laid in the mud and rain. I could do that. How hard could that be? And initially was rejected for the team. Like I had no resume other than wanting to do it. No psychology degree, no background, nothing. Got rejected. And that was really the key point because I take initiative and I take advice from the right people. And the woman in charge said, go volunteer on a suicide hotline. So I'm like, all right. Found a hotline, started to volunteer, and that was magic, man. How do you get people to change extreme behavior in extremely short periods of time? Which was just the application of empathy. They called it empathy at the time. Proactive listening is a better term. And just changing people's behavior in 20 minutes. They told us when I first got on the line, you can't stay on a call for more than 20 minutes. And in movies and TV, like, they're on the phone with people for hours. Hours. Richard Branson's book, Losing My Virginity. I'm a fan of Richard Branson. He talks about talking overnight to people that he tried to talk out of suicide. Because in his early days, he's always been a good guy. In his early days, he's doing crisis intervention, crisis hotline stuff overnight. And 20 minutes, you got to be kidding me. And that was really the beginning. How do you, imagine what it's like to sit down with somebody and know that you can get through to them in 20 minutes when everybody else in their family has failed for months. And that's what they taught on a hotline. So that was the beginning of it.
What was the reason for the 20-minute limit? Was there a specific practical reason for that?
Great question. Because I'm of the thought that there's a practical reason for everything. Like, if you drill down far enough, you're going to find a practical reason. Like, why do Catholics eat fish on Friday? Well, the Pope needed to help the Italian fishing industry. So he says, you know what? It's bad to eat meat on Fridays. But he was really practical. He's a practical dude.
Isn't that how the McDonald's fillet of fish came to be or something like that? Because I think they used to only serve it on Fridays.
Oh, it could have been.
I could be wrong here, but don't quote me on that, but I think it used to only be available on Fridays.
Well, that would be an economic smart move, wouldn't it? All right, so 20 minutes or less. Why? Because also the biggest problem on any crisis hotline is not the people that genuinely need your help. The people that call you to suck the life out of you. And they were called frequent callers. And I found dealing with them fascinating. But if you let one of those frequent callers be the first move in a conversation, you're going to be on the phone for hours. Mm-hmm. And then the people that genuinely need help don't get through on the line. And so part of the training was to recognize that person early mm-hmm. and then like smell them, if you will. And then draw a clear boundary. You know, don't be mean, but put a clear boundary up and actually be on the phone with them for less than 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. But if you've got sort of that guideline, then in general terms, you're going to handle all your calls in 20 minutes or less. Like I remember the first one that I really caught when my instincts started getting good. And the guy calls in on the phone. He says, "Can I talk to you about something?" And I said, "I'll talk with you." But talking to me was mm-hmm. code for I talk, you shut up.
Yep.
And I caught that. I remember catching that. And then his demeanor changed immediately. Like, the ground rules are we talk with each other or we don't talk. Mm. And tiny little lessons like that. It was great.
What's the male-female split on those type of calls?
The manipulative callers were almost all males.
Okay.
And I'm sure, there was some representation of females.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I'd imagine it's very heavily skewed male.
But it was heavy. To my knowledge, it was almost all male. Mm. Interesting. What makes you ask?
What makes me ask? I'm curious of when someone is talking about certain scenarios or explaining certain concepts, I often in my brain have an idea about the type of person or the demographic that may be involved, even if that is not explicitly stated. And so sometimes I ask a clarifying question to see if my assumptions and hypotheses are accurate, even if I don't know exactly why that might be, right? I have an awareness of suicide attempt and actual suicide statistics. And I know that I think attempts, it's more even. I know in terms of actual, suicides that kill a person, it skews heavily male. That's true in the UK. It's true in the US. It's true in Japan. It's probably true in every country in the world.
Yeah. Commonality of humanity.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, who are the people picking up that call and hitting that number?
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Cool. Good question.
Yeah. What are the differences between negotiating someone who is talking someone off the ledge who's threatening to take their own life versus talking someone off the ledge who's threatening to take someone else's life?
All right. So that gets into a whole nother category. Mm-hmm. When I was in a bureau, in a hostage negotiation crisis intervention, it's largely crisis intervention. And there's frequently an element of suicide. But there's a big difference between a guy barricaded in a house threatening to kill himself and his wife, girlfriend, versus a guy standing on a ledge. Mm. The jumper scenario, completely different cat.
Okay.
And the jumper is most often, it's a bargaining situation to some degree. And the guy in the house ain't a bargaining situation. The person on the ledge, there's visibility there. Mm. And they get up there. If you engage in conversation with them at all, if they engage with you at all, they want something. They've gotten up there and they're trying to get visibility. Now they'll if they don't get what they want in 2 or 3 tries, they're going to kill themselves anyway. Mm. But that's much more of a bargaining situation. So the guy up on the ledge wants something. If you're talking to him, and which is all in any form of communication. How open they are to communication at the beginning is always the first tell. Like even in business, we apply this stuff to business. Somebody calls in and they only want to know our price. It's a manipulative call. They're playing us. We're the fool in the game. There's a favorite and a fool in every game. If you don't know who the fool is, it's probably you. And what they're doing is they're doing free consulting, due diligence, or competing bid. And there nothing that I learned in suicide intervention, crisis intervention, hostage negotiation, it all applies to business. Because as we were talking before about the universal nature of who's trying to kill themselves, there's a universal nature of human beings, period. Because we were all human when we were first wired. So somebody's calling in, wants our price. We're a competing bid. We don't have a shot at the business. Somebody up on a ledge, very determined, if we're discussing anything, wants something very specific, not really interested in talking about anything other than what they want or getting that data point before they proceed. So it's my job in any situation to dial into how do you see the world? What are you after? Have you been wronged? What's at stake? And then what's happened to you recently? Guy up on a ledge, something has happened in the last 24 to 48 hours that set him off. Probably a combination of two things, personal and professional. And those two cause people to change their behavior, to up the stakes. What I've done up to now hasn't worked, and this has hit me so hard, I got to try something more extreme. So now I know that going in. So guy up on a ledge, I'm fishing for what happened in the last 2 days. Hard, and I know it's there. Now I'm not going to jump to it till you've given me a hint that you might open the door. If it's a loss of a relationship, and my intel tells me before we've spoken that you just, the girl you're in love with kicked you out of the house 48 hours earlier. Now you're up on a ledge. I can't say that until you indicate to me the door's open. That's really the key issue. Like, I could know it's there. I could have, before we get out on a bridge with you, I could have, yeah, man, Chris has just been a wreck since she kicked him out 2 days ago. And he's been drinking, and he's just all over the place. Witnesses, close friends, everybody's telling me that. I can't get up there and I can't say, look, man, I know you're really hurting over this girl. Because you haven't said anything to me yet. Which means you feel I'm trying to manipulate you. So I'm just going to say, you're in a bad spot. Because you're up on a bridge, just trying to hop off. And then I'm going to wait and see if you invite me in. And I'm going to wait for the invitation. And then you're going to feel respect. So I've rambled all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's all good.
on your question.
In those type of situations or scenarios, what's the best thing and what's the worst thing that can be said to someone?
Well, the worst thing is advice.
Okay.
Second worst thing is...
Can you go into that a bit more?
Yeah, like, well, here's what you need to do. You just need to get back out there. The best cure for one disease is another disease. You want to get over some girl, find another girl. That's horrible. Now, it might be true. But I don't know if it's the right term. I've disempowered you. As soon as I start giving you advice, the inner message you receive is that I think you're not capable of working this out on your own. So I'm either insulting you or I'm telling you you're really lost. I'm saying like, dude, you're pathetic. You can't handle this without my advice. So advice is really disabling, even if it's true. Like if you ask me what to do, that's one thing. Now I got to test you a little bit. A lot of times when people say to me, seems like, what do you think I should do? I might say, you sound confused. I'm going to feed back. I'm not giving advice unless I'm 1,000% sure that you're actually asking me versus you're saying it rhetorically or you're trying to bounce things off me. But as a general rule, advice is really not helpful, even if it's completely accurate, because the message the other person receives doesn't empower them, doesn't make them stand up. So these skills are perishable. Emotional intelligence is nearly unlimited as long as you work at it, and it can diminish if you don't work at it. Mm-hmm. So I'm on a suicide hotline for a year, making all my shifts, but not working at the skills. I'd be like Tiger Woods, only playing in tournaments, spending no time on a practice tees. Mm-hmm. None. So a year in, since I'm doing it constantly, and I figure, doing it's good enough to stay good at it, they bring me in for an annual evaluation. And at the end of the call, I didn't realize that I'd been given advice. And the caller congratulated me on how smart I was. And so I go back to the room to be evaluated by the supervisor. It was a great guy, sweetheart of a guy. We were good friends. And he says, that was horrible. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you didn't listen to my call. My call, I was so good, the guy congratulated me on the job I did. He goes, yeah, let's start with that. If he congratulated you, you did it and he didn't. Hmm. So as soon as he gets off the phone, he's lost because he needs you for success. And you actually disabled him to some degree because he finished that call feeling less capable than he was when he went in, even though the stuff you said made sense. I'm like, but I've been online, I did my shifts. I've been doing this. Like, no, man, you did nothing to work at this, and you steadily lost ground for a year. So while I'm fascinated by this overall, I also realize I got to practice because I get, I hate leaving money on the table, and I do sometimes. I hate having a negative interaction with somebody I should have had a positive interaction with, and I do because I get in a bad mood or I overreact to somebody. But when I find myself doing that, I'm not above apologizing and 2 out of 3 people an apology is a throwaway. But then also addressing whatever the issue was on how I got off track in the first place.
Okay, so if giving advice in those type of situations,
the original question: what are the bad
disempowers
things?
People? What's the right thing to do? What's the way to empower people in such situations?
Well, first of all, if I'll say all right, so if you don't know what to do, you sound confused. Sounds like you got a lot of things rolling through your head and you're having trouble sorting them out. Those 2 statements are actually very specifically designed statements to help you clear your head. And each word is specifically chosen. Because then I become a sounding board, which, first of all, helping people talk things through, if they just get it out of their mouth and they say it out loud, they're like, oh, now that I've said it out loud, that does sound stupid. Mm. Or now that I've said it out loud, I can actually make sense of it. Because while the stuff is still contained in our brain, it's either really confusing because we're having trouble sorting it out, or the wrong answer seems to make a lot of sense. So you really need people, as soon as they start saying stuff out loud, automatically think better and clarify. And so that's the first part. Hear what you're saying off me. Just be a great sounding board. Now, the other thing is you sound confused. Actually deactivate your confusion because it's the observation of a negative state of mind. And the neuroscience backs this up. Any observation of a negative tends to deactivate it. Actually, more than tends to. It's almost a 1-to-1 correlation. And the degree of deactivation changes. Mm. But just the observation of a negative, and our brains are largely negative because that's survival mode, and every human being is wired to be overly negative because that's the wiring that we inherited universally. So as soon as we start to clear that up, we start to sort things out. So my first job is to deactivate your negative thoughts. And the most effective and enduring way to deactivate them is just call them out. You know, you sound concerned, you sound anxious, you sound upset, you sound confused.
Does the tone that's done in, I'm assuming that matters a lot, because all of those statements, depending on the tone of voice, can vary in how it conveys and comes across to the other person. I can imagine all of those statements being made in a way that would disarm a person. And also in a way that would sound rather inflammatory.
Yeah. Tone is the Jedi secret. And I can offend you, or I can compliment you, or I can settle you out with the same words, all with different tones. And it's a neuroscience thing too. It's not psychology. So yes, tone makes all the difference in the world. Like I could say, you know, when we first started talking, you thought I was a liar. And my tone of voice says, you dumb MFer. You know, you're an idiot. And that's insulting. And I could say, when we first started talking, you thought I was a liar? Same words, lands, and not offensive. And you go like, oh, and then you might say, no, I didn't think you were a liar. It just it sounded so different to me. I didn't understand it. I wasn't thinking you're a liar, that your heart was in the wrong place. I was just so new to me.
This is interesting. I want to go into this a little bit, because I think this is fundamentally one of the biggest problems that occurs on social media in terms of communication. Because the further away you get from real world in-person communication, the more of the communication gets lost. So what we're doing right now, face-to-face, this is the ultimate form of communication. This is how human beings have communicated for 99.9% of our existence. Either it's in person or there's no communication. And then a step away from that, which is a new technology.
Cavemen aren't texting each other, are they?
No, but even that's a few ones down, right? So next you could have, what's the next best thing? I guess a video call, which is a relatively new technology. That's like the next best. Below that, you have a voice-only phone call. So now you can't see facial expressions anymore. You've still got the tone, but now you've lost facial expressions. You've lost a lot of the body language. Further down from that, we're now getting into, I guess, maybe voice notes, because that's not real time. And now you've got various forms of text. And I think at the bottom is something like tweeting, right? Just short form messaging. So there's no tone, there's no body language, there's no facial expressions. You've got an audience there, you've got various incentives. And I think one of the things that happens online, and I see this all the time on social media, particularly on X/Twitter, is things just get misconstrued all over the place, because so much of the underlying form of communication is just stripped away. So someone can say something that in the real world would very obviously be a joke. But then on the internet, it gets seen by millions of people. Maybe 30% recognize that it's a joke, 30% are, understand it this way seriously, 30% take it this other way, 10% take it a totally other form. And now this thing has just sort of blown up into this massive explosion, which in reality, people would have just been like, oh yeah, that was just a joke.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Agree completely. Yeah. And tone is a magic. And then the feel for in person. Yeah. And we caution people about that all the time. We try to.
Yeah.
We'll often tell someone, if you send a tweet, a text, or an email, read it out loud in the harshest tone of voice you can imagine, because that's the way the other side's going to hear it.
Yeah.
I sent internally in the bureau, they asked me some question about overtime, because I'm sending negotiators overseas, and you work a kidnapping overseas, you're 24/7. Like there ain't no working hours. And they sent me a text or an email saying like, all right, so your headquarters guy, you authorize an overtime. And I sent a one-word, concise email. And when I typed the word no, I heard it going like, no. And they read it, no! Yeah. Like, what? Why are you guys so mad? I meant this gently, and you're acting like, I screamed at you. That's how they read it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a theory that however many people see or hear a message, it's that many translations.
Yeah, depending upon what mood, however many moods there are when they read it, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And everyone's just got a different wiring. Everyone's got different stuff. Everyone's got different words that can comfort them or trigger them or something like that. So you put something out and, if you're talking one-on-one with people, you only need to be concerned with that one other person can understand it. But if you're talking to an audience of, say, 1 to a million, which you might be doing with a book or with, if people are listening to a podcast is really a one-on-one conversation that's beamed out there, but certainly a social media statement or something like a YouTube video, you have to recognize that, okay, 1 million people are going to translate this in 1 million different ways.
If I ever get my own podcast, you got to come on as a guest because you are one fascinating guy.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm actually working on a podcast, and I would love to dig into how you think.
I'd love to.
So we're going to turn the tables at some point in time.
No doubt. I would absolutely love to. There's something we were actually talking about before we turned the video on, and I was saying something about a convergence of how I want to say all the sort of sense makers, truth seekers, and truth speakers all around the world, regardless of geographic location, sector, job, age, all of these things, everyone seems to be finding each other and converging in a unique, magical way. And you said you wanted to go into that a little. So what are your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, well, the first several things that triggered to me was like the truth speakers and the truth seekers. We're into this thing called empathy universally. Mm-hmm. And empathy is really just understanding. It's not agreement, and it's not sympathy. We believe in a commonality of human beings, and we don't want to get clicks by throwing rocks. Like, you don't pick a controversial issue and then wade in with a controversial opinion just to get people's attention. Like if somebody's taking some heat in social media for some alleged misdoing, we ain't jumping in to get on the bandwagon. And we're actually intentionally staying out of it. Or if we say anything at all, like during a presidential debate a couple nights ago, it would be easy for me to jump in. And, he said this or he said, and I could have got a lot of clicks from one side or the other. But instead, the most controversial thing I had to say was, I see 2 people that never read, never split the difference. There's at least 2 out there that haven't. And then we'll try to bring some levity so people, if we jump in, we try to jump in a way where people start talking with each other. Mm. And I'm seeing that as a commonality of the true seekers and true speakers. And the other thing I was thinking of on my way over here is, like, I'm an old guy. I'm a last century dude. I've been around for a while. I like to joke, my team likes to joke with me about, whether or not we had telephones at all when I was growing up. We just communicated with smoke signals. But I find then, regardless of age, people are on a similar journey of discovery in their life. And then that's why, like, I haven't left the bureau and then what I'm into now. I mean, I got friends of all ages and all demographics, including convicted felons that I wasn't even allowed to interact with on a friendship basis when I was with the Bureau, for good reason. Like, the Bureau's got, despite their reputation in the media today, among federal agencies, the Bureau has a reputation for being a bunch of Boy Scouts. Like the CIA thinks the Bureau's a whole bunch of Boy Scouts, and they're annoyed as hell.
When you say a bunch of Boy Scouts, what do you mean by that?
Well, we believe in truth, justice, and the American way. We believe in the legal system. We believe in that when you tell the truth, and then telling part of the truth and leaving stuff out ain't telling the truth. Like, deception by omission with the Bureau is a crime. Deception by omission with some intelligence agencies is Monday. Mm-hmm. That's how we do things. And so, I wasn't allowed to associate with known felons in any phase of my law enforcement career. And a couple of people that I think the world of now, Molly Bloom, good friend, wonderful human being, convicted felon, ran a gambling game in New York City, got locked up for it, refused to cooperate, and actually pled guilty and said, the government is not going to force me to cooperate, and I'm going to take my lumps all by myself. Ain't nobody going with me. Just complete ownership of the problem, but still convicted felon. I think the world of Molly. Andre Norman, former prison gang leader, making a world a better place. Andre, people ask him what he was locked up for, and I was convicted of attempted homicide 8 times. And very honest about it. Mm-hmm. And the moment when he was planning 2 more murders, Andre will say, it ain't my fault they didn't die.
What a line.
Yeah, because, unflinching about who he was previously. He's sitting in a prison cell planning 2 more murders to ascend to the top of the gang. And he says, God came in and said, you're not killing anybody else. You're done killing people. That was his epiphany moment. He's sitting there planning that. And he says, God comes in and, Andre, you're not doing this anymore. Got another path for you. He had several realizations simultaneously, but unflinchingly honest about who he was. Like, it doesn't, the Bureau would not have accepted me and Andre hanging out when I was there. And he's a friend, I think the world of him, and he's making the world a better place. So, but we're all kind of in the same, your original question, the convergence. Mm-hmm. We're all sort of converging about how did we get here? It doesn't matter how old you are, who you are, but globally,
yes,
we're tired of the political nonsense, and we believe that you want to make the world a better place. You don't tell somebody else how they should do it. You just sort of take it on yourself.
I think this is one of the things I'm most optimistic about for this century, because this is the first time in human history where we've had the technological and communication means for this to take place. I mean, just the way that we connected, or so many of the hundreds of people I've interviewed or been interviewed by, and thousands of people I've met, it's just thinking, I mean, even 20 years ago, I'm like, this would not have happened. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this connection, this ability we were just talking about, I mean, I live in Dubai, and you were talking about, you were in Dubai recently, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and you've been in Saudi, and it's like, we're from, in many ways, actually, our worlds are, in some aspects, it seems like our worlds are totally different. And, you and I, like, what do these 2 guys have in common?
Right.
But then you just have a conversation even for a few minutes, and you find all of these commonalities, and there's something in the head and there's something in the heart that actually our missions, we're going about it in quite different ways and from different worlds. But I think our sort of core mission is very similar and very aligned, and all these people who are aligned and doing it in their different ways. Well, this person's in the health and fitness space, this person's in politics, this person's in media, this person's in music and arts and culture, but they're all just like finding each other. And I'm just really intrigued by that.
Yeah, it is really cool, right? The global communication, people want to complain about the social media and all the rest of this because they see the bad parts about it. But, like I said, how the heck are we going to cross paths otherwise?
Absolutely. How long were you in the FBI for?
24 years.
24 years. Okay.
Yeah, I'd been eligible to retire for 2 days when I got out.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
It was a planned exit.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about empathy, because I think empathy is, I think it's an overused word, but I think it's normally misused.
Yeah,
I think it's
almost always.
Conflated with sympathy a lot.
Yep, amen.
Okay.
Exactly.
Can you talk about the difference there?
All right, so empathy is really, in its purest form, the transmission of information. Now, the reaction to that transmission could be compassion, but empathy isn't compassion, empathy isn't sympathy. Way back last century when I learned this stuff, they said on a suicide hotline, if somebody's in quicksand, you don't help them by getting in quicksand with them. You stay out of the quicksand. So sympathy is probably, and it's not empowering to the other side. It doesn't help you to know that I feel bad too. It doesn't help you at all. Like misery loves company, maybe to some degree, but it's not solution-based in any way, shape, or form. Nobody ever said the companionship of misery solve problems. No. So empathy is me letting you know that I know where you're coming from. Now, and I could be wrong. I got to be open to correction. And I don't have to act like I agree. When I was with the Bureau and I first started collaborating with Harvard, Bob Manukin wrote a book called Beyond Winning. It's got the best chapter on empathy I've ever read. And it's a negotiation book written principally for lawyers. And that chapter is assigned reading for everybody that comes onto my company. You got to read this. I don't care what your background is. You got to read this and understand it. And he flat out says empathy doesn't even mean you like the other side. Not only do you not have to agree with them, you don't even have to like them. What's empathy look like? When I was with the Bureau, we got a trial against a legitimate Islamic cleric in open criminal court in the Southern District in New York, civilian trial. The things that people would have said after 9/11 couldn't be done. Well, we did it. It was no big deal. Muslim witnesses from the Middle East testifying voluntarily against a legitimate Muslim cleric because they didn't believe that killing people in the name of their religion was a good idea. How did I get those people to cooperate voluntarily? First time I'd sit down with them, I'd say, you believe that for the last 200 years there have been a succession of American governments that have been anti-Islamic. That's empathy. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I made no statement whatsoever about whether or not I liked or disliked them. Straight observation. And there's no doubt that I didn't say, I agree with you too, and I didn't follow up, but here's why you're wrong, First Amendment. I'd throw that out there and I'd shut up. And they'd look at me and they'd go like, you could see them start to blink. And it'd be like, yeah, that's right. You believe this to be true. That's empathy. Especially, and most especially, if you want somebody to feel understood, you call out the stuff that's a negative between the two of you. I could say, you believe that America we're more entrepreneurism as anywhere in the world, which is true, but that's focusing on the positive. You believe there's more opportunity in America than anywhere else in the world. Clearly that's what they believed because they were in the U.S. to make money and send it home. And if it wasn't the best place where there was the most opportunity and for entrepreneurism and for anybody you grew up in a country that has no concrete at all, and suddenly you look around, and I remember a guy who played for the Giants told his family in Africa, they got sidewalks that run right straight up all the way to their houses around here. Those things are true, but that's focused on the positive. I'm calling out the negatives to start off with, and then just letting it sit. And that's kind of what empathy is. I express what I think your perspective is, not sugarcoating any of it and not ignoring the negatives. And then you feel heard and understood. And since we started doing this in hostage negotiation, now the neuroscience backs up why that works. Fundamental neuroscience, not psychology. I get asked about psychology all the time. Like, I couldn't tell you a Freudian from any of these other guys. But I can talk to you about neuroscience that I picked up. from reading as much about it as I can get. And so that's empathy, just the expression of the other side's point of view.
For all the talk of empathy in our society, I think it's massively discouraged and a lot of people are afraid of it.
Yep. Yeah.
Because I think it's conflated so much with sympathy. I think that if someone is to do and say something like what you said, it's often interpreted as condoning the thing that you're empathizing with.
Yep. Yeah.
So if someone holds a point of view which is outside of the view of your given tribe, interpret that however you wish, then people assume that you're sympathizing with that position,
right,
and that is now your position. So just by saying you understand it or attempting to try to understand it, people try to pin that on you.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this can go to various extremes, right? There could be a situation where something truly heinous happens. You could look at things that are historical or things that are happening now, and empathy would be really drilling into that and trying to understand the perspective, let's say, of the bad guy, right? Trying to understand that perspective and saying, okay, I can understand that. But just by taking that step, people then people conflate that with you are sympathetic to the position, or you agree with the position, or you think that it was okay that what happened. And I find that shuts down a lot of communication. The most obvious way to see this is in political discussions and so-called culture war discussions, where as people almost take pride. People will say, I don't understand how anyone could believe X. And they'll say that as a point of pride. They'll say that as if that's a good thing. The lack of empathy is good. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, they're bragging about their lack of insight.
When someone's like, regardless of someone's views, I don't understand how anyone could vote for Trump. I'm like, really? Of all those dozens of millions of people, like you can't even understand. You might not agree. You might think, oh, this or this. You could be totally against that position, but I'm like, that's a huge human flaw on your part if you can't even understand why someone would. And I don't even think it's you can't understand. I think it's you don't want to, because you don't want to get lumped into that tribe by what you consider your own tribe. You don't want to catch that label. So you'll just kind of close your ears, close your eyes, not even have those conversations or even think from another perspective, because you don't want that to happen. So I think there's a lot of fear of true empathy.
Yeah, there's a lot of fears. I mean, I think there are a variety of type of fears, but I think that one way or another, it's fear in any form. Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah,
and it does come across as weakness. Like one of the most hysterical things when Hillary was running for president, and she talked about that if she was doing, I think she said something to the effect of using empathy in foreign policy. And Republicans jumped all over her for being weak. Like, I got to tell you something. Of all the things that Hillary Clinton has been accused of, being weak ain't on that list. I've heard a lot of stuff about her from supporters and detractors. And weakness ain't there. But it completely gets equated with weakness.
Yeah. I don't think people will understand what it is. I think they're thinking of sympathy.
Yes.
I think they're thinking she's saying we need to be sympathetic and almost like agree with our enemies, which is not what it's saying. It's saying, no, we should try to understand this. Actually, there's great examples of this as well. I mean, it was the same with so when the whole most recent Russia-Ukraine situation kicked off, the sell to the general public was just that Vladimir Putin is a madman.
Right.
And he's just invaded Ukraine just on a whim, completely randomly, because he's a psychopath.
Right.
And anyone who even tried to see it from the Russian perspective or the Putin perspective, you are immediately, people point the finger at you, accuse you, you're a Putin apologist, you're pro-Russia, you're anti-Ukraine, you're pro-war, whatever it is. Just from, you might just say, well, okay, let's think from his perspective. Again, let's take the judgment out of it. Let's think from his perspective over the course of decades. And, NATO is moving, just NATO moving eastwards.
Tightening
the noose. Can you not see how he might feel some type of way about that? it's not saying you're saying the invasion is justified or you want war or violence or anything, but just by having even that basic level of empathy, I found it interesting how people were being labeled pro-Putin just for saying, why don't we try to think about his motives here? And if you don't even want to think about the motives of other people, it's like, how are you supposed to solve anything? Great, you can virtue signal by saying that you don't understand it and it's, it's beyond reason. It's like, it's not beyond reason. Very few things are totally beyond reason.
Right.
Very few things are beyond reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you completely, 100%. And and when they get started up on that, I could see how people were beginning to label apologists. As a general rule, mostly they try to stay out of the political stuff when it's really hot.
Yeah, same.
Because it's a distraction. But I got news for you. I can give you 5-6 more reasons while I can see where he's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading somebody when the war first started, dismissively, they said, Russia's Europe's gas station. Diminishing them. And I thought, all right, so if that's true, and what you're saying is the way he's feeding his people and keeping the lights on is on an industry that the entire world is trying to get out of. So what's his future look like? His people are going to freeze in the dark and starve. That'll drive you into a corner. So yeah, there's a lot, not to justify his actions, but a lot to understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, for sure. Another place where empathy just seems to be lacking, maybe it's connected to this as well, but just I find in the general leadership of our countries. Right. When I look across the West, and to be honest, this extends beyond the West, but it's fascinating how, you brought up this point about the debate about how they should have read your book and they clearly haven't. But it's kind of fascinating how people can rise to certain levels of certain positions of power and influence when they seem to, obviously Trump has negotiation skills. Like, I think that's...
He has marketing skills.
Okay.
I'll give you, I think he's quite possibly the best marketer in the world.
Okay.
But negotiation skills, all right, so how do you do negotiating the deal with North Korea?
I don't know, but there was no war.
Everybody's reaction is the same.
Okay.
Start out really great with a bang, completely commend him for opening that conversation, being willing to talk directly. He didn't inherit that mess. And prior to him, no American president would meet directly. And he's got no problem meeting directly. Mm. And then you say, how did that end up? Everybody goes like, It went away with no resolution. Nothing moves forward. So great marketing effort to start off with. But as a closer, as a completer, that creates long-term relationships, and which is what typically happens with overly assertive negotiators. You start off with a bang, everybody getting either, with firing, lobbing grenades, speaking figuratively, or brass band. And then after all the excitement at the beginning, it's just like nobody knows what really happened. Like, I don't know, it just kind of went away. Now, flip side, a great marketer is somebody that just relentlessly tries stuff until something sticks and is shameless in pivoting. I tried this, it didn't work. Abandon immediately. Don't get ego caught up in the fact that it didn't work. Try something else. Try. Pay attention to what sticks. Look at the data. Something sticks, stick with it. Like, I don't know how many names he's called Joe Biden. But he's always, he just keeps calling people, he just keeps coming up with a label of ridicule, which there's a certain amount of humor and emotional positioning there. And, if one doesn't stick, he didn't care. Mm. He just keeps going. I
think Sleepy Joe stuck pretty well.
Yeah. Finally, right? But and even then, like in the debate, he didn't call him that once. Yeah. And he's got a great sense of data and marketing, and he just shamelessly moves ahead. And I think that's a sign of a great marketer.
Yeah.
Like, everybody thinks the Trump brand is fantastic around the world. And So what's he do? He's into branding. He doesn't build buildings anymore. Slapping his name on stuff. So astute, like him or hate him, give the devil their due, if you will. Recognize what the talents are. I think he's a great marketer.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to, practically speaking, so for people who are listening, of course, I want people to read your book. It's a great book. But in terms of their interpersonal relationships,
right?
What are some quick wins that they should perhaps be aware of? What are some of the common flaws that are made in our sort of day-to-day conversations and relationships that are easy to avoid, but perhaps are not so intuitive? What's a thing where maybe you should stop doing that, or maybe you should start doing that?
Well, there's a difference between waiting for your opportunity to speak and actually listening. So it's kind of two steps. You got to actually listen. You don't have to just indicate interest. You got to actually listen. Like somebody could ask you a great question, you respond to it. You can tell they didn't listen. They're driving, they're looking at something else, or they hit you with another great question immediately. And you get the sense you didn't get listened to. And there's a lot of really good intentioned people like moms, like parents. How was your day? Fine. What happened? Nothing. Well, how did they get into that? Because when they asked the kid how their day was, the first time the kid responded, they immediately, instead of showing they heard him, went to, what did you do? Like you gave no indicator whatsoever that you were listening to the answer to your first question. We got no shortage of parents that have learned mirroring, which is just repeating the last three words of what somebody's just said. Teenage daughter comes in. How was your day? She says, fine. How do you mirror that? It's just one word. Parents got to say, fine? With that upward curious inflection. Mm-hmm. But at a bare minimum, the parent is indicating they heard that word and they're feeding it back and they're looking for more instead of immediately launching into, what did you do? And we're seeing parents everywhere. Suddenly my teenage daughter's talking to me. Like, I don't know what happened. We just you were well-intentioned with your questions. Your heart was in the right place. And you may have listened to the answer, but you didn't let them know at all that you listened to the answer, or you were frustrated by the one-word answer. So your frustration with the one-word answer came out in, well, what did you do? And that tone of voice is, you're not talking to me. Prove it was fine by telling me what you did. So these tiny little moments that actually don't take any real time go a long way in making people feel heard. So being interested is not enough. And seeing their point of view is not enough. You have to actually demonstrate it.
It's one reason why I love doing podcasts and love talking to people in general. I used to sell my CDs on the street. So I've met hundreds of thousands of people and had hundreds of thousands of face-to-face, in-person conversations way before 99% of people who now know who I am, they didn't know me at this time. And so by the time it got to the point of doing other things, I had just had so much experience in communicating with such a broad range of people. I very much pride myself on the ability to speak to, I like to think I can speak to everybody. I can have a conversation with virtually anybody. And I think it's often forgotten that, I think when it comes to communication, people recognize that speaking is a skill and writing is a skill, and maybe people understand that reading is a skill, but I think listening tends to be forgotten. I think a lot of people hear more than they listen, and you forget that listening is, I've heard you don't like the term active listening, you prefer proactive, but just really properly listening to someone, I think is much harder and a rarer skill than people appreciate.
Yeah. Which is why when you get it, if you do it, you got this great advantage because nobody else is doing it. Like in every negotiation book, it doesn't matter who wrote the book, whether it's super academic, my Harvard brothers and sisters getting DS's academic blueprint for rational negotiations. Or let's say it's just maybe a practitioner that was great at it and wanted to write a book about it. The elements on listening are always listed as an advanced skill.
Mm.
So mastering an advanced skill always gives you a competitive advantage. So, yeah, agreed.
Chris, what's next for you?
What's next? Like all kind of crazy stuff on the horizon. Most likely, I'd love to have a podcast where I get to interview cool people like you.
Mm.
But
what would you call it?
That's a great question. I'm gonna leave that in the hands. Well, we're gonna launch a bourbon called The Difference, so maybe the podcast will be called The Difference.
Okay,
that might work. You pin me down there.
You don't have to commit to it publicly right now. I'm just curious.
But actually, yeah, it could be an interesting name. When the branding would align with the bourbon we're going to put out. But we're, since the book is available globally, and our audience is really entrepreneurs who want to collaborate with people versus against. We're working on having more of a global presence, and so I'm looking for people in other countries who've used the skills successfully and maybe want to come on board to coach and train it. You got a young lady who goes, she's got us from China. She's got us calling her Joanne. Chinese are tired of Americans not being able to pronounce their names. So instead of just struggling with listening to you butcher their name, my name is Joanne. So I'm like, okay, I know what you're doing here, and you're actually taking it easy on me. So I'm looking for more people like that globally who are magically making great deals. So that's what we're doing a lot of too. And then how do we find them? If you subscribe to our newsletter, which is available on our website, shameless plug here, blackswanltd.com. We got a lot of free stuff at blackswanltd.com because maybe you're some guy selling his CDs on the street. And as of right now, you don't have the coin it takes to get to one of our live events. So how do we get you there? How do we help you and then get you into a tribe that believes the same way you believe? And so that, because by and large, most of the people in your circle aren't thinking the same way, aren't thinking empathy as a good thing. Mm. So you need more people around you. And blackswanltd.com is a way to find the tribe and find free stuff.
Chris, it's been an honor and a pleasure speaking with you. I love your work. I look forward to following more of it in the future. Yeah. I think it's massively beneficial to a lot of people all over the world, clearly. And let's have more communication and more empathy.
Amen.
No doubt. God bless you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.